said 2:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started.
There's more, there's extra chairs back there, so.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to start another row,
Yeah.
there's a whole row right here. We don't bite, I promise.
Oh, yeah, there's a bunch of open seats up here. Come show that. So we'll start off in here kind of talking. The idea was to go on a walking tour. I'm fine walking out here in the wind and stuff, so we'll do a little bit of talking at you, and then we'll go out there and kind of check out a little bit of this restoration site we've been working on. And so, welcome. Naknuwiłáma Tiičámna, Bobby Fosnick, glad you're over here. My name is Bobby Fosnick, Naknuwiłáma tribe. It's my dad back here. This is Brosnan. Really glad to have you all here. We thought about doing a PowerPoint, but figured you guys are going to be probably seeing plenty of PowerPoints the next few days. Probably see a lot of PowerPoints in your lines of work, so figured we'd just kind of tell you what we're going to tell you in kind of a story form. And so we couldn't talk about our work without talking about how we came to be as Naknuwiłáma. So, long ago, before us humans ever even were here, all the many plants and animals in this land already lived here. The Nusuk, the Kasuyas, the Yamash, all the Hnit, all the Tamanit, all the Taupnuk, and the Chush, and all these material plants that were already here. They already had a community going. They already had their way of life set in place here on this land that we call the Columbia River Basin. And they all knew we were coming. The Creator let them all know that the humans are coming. The humans are coming, and they're going to be like infants. They're not going to know how to take care of themselves. They're not going to know how to feed themselves or clothe themselves. They're not going to know how to build their shelters or take care of the water. And if nobody shows them how to take care of themselves in the land and the water, they're going to make a mess out of things. They're going to destroy the water and the land. And they're going to make it hard on all life, not only themselves, but they're going to make it hard on everybody. And so the Creator told Coyote this, gave Coyote this message. Coyote, there's going to be these people coming. They're going to be like babies. What are we going to do? What are you guys going to do? So Coyote gathered up with all the animals and plants and gave them this message and said, soon there's going to be a new kind of people here. And they're not going to know how to take care of themselves in the land or the water. And we're going to have to show them how. And I tell this story to kids a lot, to help them to understand this place we live and that they live. And it occurred to me when I was telling this last outdoor school group that none of them ever suggested that we try to prevent them from coming here. They never said, oh, let's get rid of them before they even show up. Instead, Salmon stood up first. Salmon stood up and said, I'll take care of them. I'll always swim up the rivers and give of myself to the people and feed them. And not only feed them, but feed all of the land and all of the life of the land. I'll give my body, I'll carry that marine-derived nutrition, getting scientific. I'll carry that in my body up the rivers and have that spread all across the landscape, all across the prairies and the forests by the eagles and the bears. And we'll give of ourselves to the people. As long as the people always take care of us, only take what they need, don't take too much, don't get greedy, and take good care of the water and the habitats that we rely on. Following the salmon was all the Waikanash, the aquatic species, like the Kasuyas and the Shushite, the steelhead, all the many salmon species, some of which don't make it up here anymore. And like I said, all these streams used to be fish rearing, and we still see steelhead make it up, and we still see mussels out here, but it's really hard because they're all diverted in straight lines and right angles for irrigation. And instead of a stream, they're renamed as ditches, which I think of ditch as a derogatory term for a stream. Because that water was a stream before it was ever a ditch, and it gives more life than just water and commodities. And so following the fish was all the many roots and the berries and the medicines and the materials. And they all gave that same promise to look after us, to give of themselves, as long as we only take what we need and we have a good heart and a good mind and take what we need in the right amount, and not every single day, not all the time, follow certain protocols for certain plants and animals so that they would always replenish year after year. And if we follow this law, we won't have to farm, we won't have to do any big industrialization. If we dig roots the right way, they'll always come back even more in the next few years. If we gather the berries in the right way, if we take care of the forests in the right way, all these foods and medicines will return. If we protect the wetlands and the rivers and the riparian zone along the river, then we'll always be taken care of in return. And so that's the ancient law that has been set forth that we still all follow to this day. And hopefully the whole tribal government, that's what it's built around, is preserving this relationship and this ancient agreement. And so as a young family, as we found our way through the world, through life, and as a young child, I've always been drawn to these old ways of doing things. I've always been drawn to plants and the animals and the river. I spent a lot of time just going down to the river and sitting there. And my dad took me down to the river a lot, took me to the hills a lot, and I started developing that relationship and was always curious, how do we make buckskin? How do we make our own rope? How do we, do all these things? And also hearing the stories of how it came to be that it's difficult for us to do some of these basic things, like have clean water and have a healthy shelter, have clean, healthy food, and all the different things that happened over the last couple hundred years that interrupted those cycles and broke a lot of those agreements and laws. And then the life we're living in now. And so I've always been drawn towards revitalizing these ways of life and bringing them back into our life. And as I do any activity, and I'm working with my hands and connecting with the land and learning about these plants, something wakes up in me and there's a healing happens and a reconnection. And I see that happen in everyone else that we work with doing these projects. And, getting back to these ways of life is a big part of our healing, and a lot of the issues we face are from being separated from it. And a lot of the issues we face, the climate crisis and humanitarian crises come from us, kind of forgetting what it means to be a human being. And so, if we want to change things, we've got to change ourselves back to human beings. And so, going along in our lives, we've always felt this calling to, let's learn our foods, let's learn our medicines, let's learn our material plants and how to use them. Let's learn how to do buckskin, and let's learn how to weave, and let's share everything we learned back with our community. And so that's sort of how it came to be that we started this organization, Caretakers of the Land, Naknuwiłáma Tiičámna. And that's our whole focus. And how it came to be that we have this relationship with the Episcopal Church and the Ascension School, like I briefly touched on in the opening. My father married a woman that's Episcopalian faith, and she told me about this summer camp that sent me here. And I was a little nervous, but I ended up being, embraced for who I was and not people trying to change me into something different. And I always appreciated that. And then I always had a strong connection to this land. My mom's from this valley, so I grew up back and forth between the res and this valley all my life. So when people ask me where I'm from, I just say the Blue Mountains, because that's where I feel like I'm from. That is where I'm from. And so I used to come here as a kid every summer, and then as a teenager I'd come back and volunteer and just work here every summer and lead craft activities and things and help run the camp. And then after years went by, we started a family and we traveled around a bit. When we felt the call to come home from traveling around the United States, felt a strong call, in my dreams and in my prayers. I see my grandma my great grandma looking at me saying, you need to get home, some strong pull bringing me back here. And after seeing the rest of the country, I realized what a special place that we're the caretakers of this area. And we still have a chance at keeping it somewhat intact and reversing some of the things that have caused certain areas to not be intact and to be degraded. And so we came back and ended up coming to a volunteer work weekend here at the Ascension School, and there was a group of Christian priests talking about the doctrine of discovery and the papal bulls, and how those decrees made by the different popes of different times saying, given permission, written permission to whatever country, Spain, Portugal, Britain, whoever, that you have, by God's will, you can go to any other place, and if it's not inhabited or controlled by Euro-Christians, it's your God-given right to go in there and get rid of the whoever's there that's not Euro-Christian. They didn't even look at them as human. You can get rid of them, enslave them. Anything that they have can become is yours. All the lands are yours. All the resources are yours. And you have my decree, and it's by God's will that you can do this. And that's, when we talk about a lot of these messes we're in, we can't overlook that part where people stated that it was God's will, or in the name of Jesus they can go and do all these heinous things. And it's still happening all over the world today. I mean, everywhere. It's still going on, those ideologies. And in a lot of places and in a lot of situations, whether we're conscious of it or not, a lot of these ideologies are still being protected and perpetuated in the systems that we're stuck in. And so here are these priests, these white priests talking about that. What are we going to do to reverse it? I never thought I would hear people talking about that, or people claiming, having any kind of, understanding that that's where this all came from. How did the dehumanization happen? How did the objectification and commodification of the land start to happen? And a lot of it comes from those religious ideologies. So anyway, this church, the Episcopal Diocese, part of their ministry is dismantling the doctrine of discovery and the papal bulls and educating the congregations on it. And so I heard them talking about that, and I was intrigued. And so we sat with them more, and they, as a young Native family, they asked us, what would you guys do? How would you guys go about it? And I said, if you ask 10 different people the same question, you're probably going to get a bunch of different answers. So I encourage you to ask more than just me. But I would start by restoring, your land holdings, because churches happen to be some of the biggest landowners in the United States. So use your resources to start restoring the landscapes, starting with this campus right here that sits on a little over 100 acres, and then encourage your congregation to do the same, and then start to either give it back to tribal people, organizations, tribes, or just, opening it up for culturally relevant things to happen there. And so, fast forward, we began working with them to restore the land here. We first got here in about 2015, and we started by, one of the first things we did was started planting wapato. Because we started noticing wapato growing in some of the marshes around here. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a water potato. It's one of our first foods that grows in marshes and wetlands. And marshes and wetlands were the first thing to go when settlers got here. Our Garden of Eden, as some of our elders referred to this valley, to them was a waste prairie. That's what their words were. As soon as we can tame this waste prairie, we can make a living from this valley. So they started draining the marshes, diverting the rivers. They cut miles and miles off of the Grand Ronde and cut it across the valley. And so my suggestion was start to restore the lands and the rivers and support that and encourage that, and then open up this campus so that we can have cultural activities here that are relevant to this area. And so started with the Wapato, then in 2019, all this land that was leased to a local rancher, farmer, we stopped leasing it, and it was mostly just wheat, plowed and sprayed year after year, plowed and sprayed with glyphosate, and the camp made, a small amount of money off of leasing it every year. And so we ended the lease and started by replanting the native bunch grasses out here, which, native bunch grasses are such a crucial part of our ecology around here with our arid climate and their ability to send down such deep roots and to feed so much, wildlife, and to provide habitat for native pollinators and all that. And the bunch grasses is how we came to be such renowned horse people too. We couldn't have become the horse people we became without the bunch grass prairies all throughout our homelands. So we started with the bunch grasses, then the following year we started planting thousands of trees and shrubs, all different native plants, first foods, riparian trees and shrubs, berries, and all kinds of things. And following our biggest planting, then there was a big heat dome and drought, which was kind of interesting to see. We lost plants, but then it was also cool to see what could make it through that and how adaptive our plants are, our foods are. And it's like, obviously they've made it through how many cataclysms, millions of years of cataclysms, and are still here, still adapting. And you know, a lot of our old stories point to these events, and that's all how we came to be here. And so we started the restoration project, and in the process of doing the restoration project, just more deeply realizing, like, what are we restoring the land for if we're not also freeing ourselves up to become human beings again? And so we realized we need to direct more of our focus towards recovering our ways of life, you know, and walking in our seasonal rounds, reassuming those migration patterns, those patterns of existence that kept our people strong and healthy for thousands of years. We're not meant to build cities and farm. It's just not the instructions we were given, you know, and we're dealing with the consequences of it. And so we started this organization to meet that restoration aspect with the cultural revitalization aspect. And some of our first projects were helping the language program with the Camas Bakery Awakening. And then after that, we've tried to dig and bake Camas as much as we can and have community events around it. The hide tanning was a big one that all my life I was always asking my dad, how do we tan these hides? You know, we're so busy with school and work that we just throw our hides away and keep as much meat as we can. But I was always like, how do we do this? And so we finally figured out how to make buckskin. And as soon as we made a couple buckskins, everybody was, I want to learn, I want to learn. And so it was kind of something we were passionate about, and then instantly met by that community need for it. And so we started doing an annual buckskin making camp here. And we have some pictures of some of this stuff up here, so after we're done talking, you can take a look at some of it. So we started doing buckskin camp and tule camp. We go out to the Lad Marsh and gather tules and bring them back here and process them. All kinds of food gathering camps, and we've just created this organization to allow us to be full on, always working on our seasonal round lifeway revitalization. You know, some of the projects we've been working on the last few years have been some of the fiber arts, like dog bane hemp, you know, learning to process dog bane hemp into ropes and baskets and thread, and the cedar root baskets. I'll go ahead and let Rob, that's her area of expertise more than myself, so I'll let her go ahead and talk about that.
Hi, my name is Roslyn Spencer. I'm from the Umatilla Indian Reservation. I'm a rural tribal member. I'm Cayuse in Umatilla. And yeah, we do a lot of different things. Baskets are one of them. One of the things that we focus on is cedar root baskets. These are our traditional berry baskets, and also before we had pots, these were our cooking baskets. So it's woven tight enough that holds water, and then you put your foods in, you put your water in, and hot rocks, and you have sticks, and you're just moving them around. It works better in bigger baskets than this. I don't know if anyone's still doing that in our area, but definitely still some cedar root weavers, and so yeah, this is now our berry baskets mainly. So we work with the family engagement program and also women's program as well, and work with mental foods are laid out here, listening to us represent them. And if you want to come up at the end, you're more than welcome to handle them. And the pictures have, when you flip them around, they have information that you can check out. But yeah, these cedar baskets, they last for a long time. This one's over 200 years old and it's still kicking. Another thing that we focus on is these are wapis baskets. These are used for when we go and gather roots. We have our wapis and we have our cuppins. And gather our foods in the spring and summer. The roots, a traditional gather for my people. And we focus on identifying, cooking, and preserving our first foods and medicines. And so some of these are what we focus on throughout the year. Take people out, show them if they don't already know, or just invite them out if they do know and they want to come gather with us. Yeah. This is a Patlapa. This is if you're a gatherer, you're going to be wearing one of these. I was just gifted this this spring, the piece from Michael Ray. And yeah, so we focus, like Bobby said, on the tule mats, cedar root weaving, hide tanning, dog bane, camas. This is camas when it's done cooking. After it's done cooking, goes from, well, its name is pomash, and then after it's done cooking, it turns into huacomo. So it transforms and it gets a new name. So these are some of the things that we focus on throughout the year.
The last couple of years I've been working with dog bane for about 15 years off and on, but then the last few years it's been really calling to us to give more time to it. And so we were, processing it, making string and rope and stuff, and then she's working on a basket right now that we've been processing it as a family, and it's as a part of artist residence that we're part of through the Greater Hells Canyon Council. We'll actually be presenting it here next weekend and at their fall event. So that's been really nice to have the time to, it's a long process. You gotta go out in the fall, winter, gather it, break it down, process it, brush it. We'll go into that later on when we'll do the workshop on it. But so that's been a big focus. And also the last few years, being a part of all up and down the river, of bringing back our river style canoes and getting out together with other families and other intertribal canoe paddles and getting out paddling. And so on the horizon, one of our next big projects, we're going to be carving a dugout canoe up at Wallowa Lake State Park from a big cottonwood tree, and that canoe will go to serve our youth. And the last few summers we've been helping with the after-school program Culture Camp, Linda Donald's sister's program, and up at Indian Lake paddling with those kids every year. And so a lot of them are now really passionate about paddling and horses and all that. So we're looking to carve this canoe and start doing more paddle camps and educational trips out on the rivers and the lakes, and getting out into the eagle caps with horses. And those are some of the things we have coming up. So many things to talk about in so many different directions. So this is kind of a brief kind of introduction to what we're doing, and really glad y'all are here. And if you want, we can head out right here and get right onto the trail and walk the loop. It's just about a mile, a little under a mile, and we can ask questions as we go, talk about things we see, successes, challenges, that kind of stuff. Is there anything I missed? Anything I should talk about before we go?
I also want to say there's teas here. This will be set up all week, I guess. We'll be here till Wednesday. So feel free to make yourself some tea. Some of this is what we've gathered and some of it is what we've purchased. It's actually pretty cool. There's a morning dove, Herbals, I believe is her name, in Pendleton. So people that are in Pendleton, go check her out. But yeah, if you want to make some teas or take some bags to go or whatever you want, it's there for you. Yeah, we could do questions after. Oh, go ahead.
You talked a little more about tule mats. I don't know if everybody realizes the importance of tule mats and
Oh, yeah.
how far back they go.
Yeah, tule mats are really important to our people. They're used for so many different things. So our canvas teepees that we see today, before we had canvas, we were using tule mats. And some people are still using tule mats for that. But you can layer them, 3 layers, and when the rain hits it, they start to expand and they're waterproof, and then when the sun hits it, they shrink and it creates ventilation. They're also used as tables, and they're still used today as tables. There's some folks that still have their feast and they'll lay the tule mats out on the floor. Drying racks, you can make, so when gathering your foods, okay, we got the roots, what do we do with them, you know? You gotta peel them and then get them out on a tule mat and let them sun dry. And then most of our stuff is dry. I mean, nowadays, some people will freeze their things, but for thousands of years, we've dried most of our things and smoked our foods. So yeah, tule mats are great for drying racks, lodges. You can make tule boats by bundling tule in bundles and then bundling those bundles together, and it creates a boat that you can float in. Duck decoys, all kinds of things, and then restoration.
Nowadays, people, you know, they're commonly used for naming mats, and you know, every part of our life, you know, tules were such a part of that. You know, from birthing your children onto them and wrapping dead bodies in them to put them into the earth, and everything in between, ground cover, lodge cover. And the common name of this plant is hardstem bulrush. Glad Marsh is one of the biggest densities of it in Northeast Oregon. So that's why, one of the reasons why we're so adamant about getting people out there, because when we first moved back to the area about 10 years ago, no one was really going out there, and then we started going out there for camas and tules, and the management at the marsh was super excited about it. And then we talked to like Thomas Morning Owl and different people who said 20, 30 years ago, if you tried to go out there, they'd call the cops on you. And so things have really changed, and we've been, you know, it's not outlawed for us to go live our ways of life anymore, you know, and it's important for us to get out there and be present in these places. But what's cool about this plant is it's a perennial, just like pretty much all of our native plants. And so it grows back every year. You can burn it, mow it, harvest every last stalk there is, and it's still gonna shoot back up the next year. And if you harvest it at the right time when the seeds are right, you're replanting it as you go. And then if you look at the end as you come up here, it naturally grows with a cellulose matrix. So it naturally grows like a really ideal insulation, because it traps the air in all those pockets. And it's sustainable and renewable. So I just always think about that as we're nowadays building our houses out of such unsustainable and toxic materials, that these old ways that are looked at as inferior, I think are actually superior and have a lot of ways to show us about how to think about those things moving forward, our lodging and our shelter, and things like this that grow back every year, that they grow in the wetlands, they filter the water, they sequester carbon, they provide habitat for countless species of insect, birds. When you're out there gathering, you can just hear the birds, and you know, we're in a decline, and you can still hear so many different birds out there and see their little nests and see the nests they make out of the little papery parts of the stalk, and find where the pollinators laid their eggs in there and then drilled their way out, the miner bees and all that. Same with the dogbane and the elderberries, and all these perennial plants that have so many ecological services, and then also provide us with everything we need for our existence while we're on Earth. So, things to think about. Glad you asked about the tules, because that's, you know, we're talking about carbon and carbon sequestration and building soil, organic soil carbon. And our ways of life just do that as a byproduct. It just happens. You know, you don't have to make it happen. It just happens as we go about our life and we do what we do. You know, whether it's baking camas, after we clean out the pit, you know, all the expanded clay pellets and charcoal and everything, you know, all goes back out on the land. And the same land that we got the wood that we cooked it with, or, you know, when you're gathering tules and you take your scraps back to the land or burn them and return that ash back to the land. Same with the dog bane. Just a real intricate, interconnected way of life that a lot of these things we're searching for solutions, you know. We were already living in that way of life for a long time, and something about learning about these things and getting back to them, I think, is going to help show us our way forward. So, you know, you can just talk about any one of these plants and all the amazing things it does for sequestering carbon and holding, you know, the soil together. And nowadays, you know, most of our soil's lifeless dust, you know, filled with toxins, and we wonder why the water can't be drank down at Irrigan, and we wonder why we're in all these predicaments, and it's pretty obvious. But so the land is supposed to be covered in diverse native perennial vegetation all the time. That right there is, if we did that, that would solve a lot of our issues. But we're so beholden to industrial agriculture that it's hard to know if we're going to find our way out of it. But, and these are my personal opinions. I don't express any opinions of any agency, or this is how I feel. So.
Yeah, we definitely ran into a lot of challenges thinking that we're gonna tend land, right? We're gonna go out and we're gonna tend land. The land is tending us. That's how it works. Super humbling. Because it was monocrop for about 100 years, the soil, the hard pans that we've had to come across is just like, it's just been hard. It's been challenging. And then also just being here to water while, you know, we're out on the, like usually we're out on the land gathering our first foods and medicines and things like that. So we're learning how to come together, take turns watering, be here in a good way, and yeah, it's been super humbling to restore land.
I'm actually saying that we found that along the way that, you know, restoration of the lands and habitats is a way that everybody can get involved, wherever your ancestry comes from. And it's given a lot of people a sense of purpose to be on that list of waterers, you know, or to be on the volunteer list to come out and help plant new plants in the fall, or pull weeds, or whatever it is. Or some people have adopted little sections where they go out and they pull thistles or whatever. And, you know, it's really cool because it's a way to invite us all. You know, our challenges become also, and that's our way of life too. You know, when we face a challenge, instead of trying to find an easy way out, we embrace it, and that's where we get our medicine. That's where we get our power. And it's the same as what we're facing as a human collective. Like, maybe we can find our medicine in this challenge we're in, if we can face it and not try to shy away from it or find a more convenient path. Because for every of these easy replacements that we have, it has a huge cost to all of life on Earth. You know, like just making string with the kids and looking around at the kids sitting there. Think about how much string they had just holding their clothes on their body that day, and how much of it's polyester, you know, plastic, or cotton that, you know, is responsible for, I think, what, 50% of the chemical pesticide and fertilizer use in the United States. So for the ease and convenience, we've replaced so many things with, or we don't have to work as hard for it, but it's all pretty toxic. And a lot of it takes a lot of violence, you know, to the earth and to other communities to do. And it takes kind of adapting some of that same doctrine of discovery ideology of, oh, those people over there aren't us, so whatever happens to them so that I can keep living at this level of comfort and convenience, it all, you know, someone's paying for it, and the land is always paying for it, the water. So, yeah. Any more questions? Yes?
I wonder if I heard you right. Did you say you're able to use cottonwood to make a canoe?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
It'd be quick though, cause it,
Yeah, we're gonna carve it green because as soon as it dries, it gets really hard. But there's actually, there's the canoe museum in Lapway, I think it is. And one of the canoes that they have have preserved is a 34-foot canoe made out of cottonwood also. So in the old days, people used whatever you could get. You know, cedar is the best, but you know, there's a story of a guy named Thluck, which means a lot. That's his name, means a lot. And he lived down on the lower Snake, Palouse Band, and he would wait there during high water time, and trees that were the right size and diameter, he'd, you know, rope them and get them closer to shore, and he'd carve them into canoes. And that's why his name was a lot, because he was rich, because he was a canoe carver and he could trade for anything he wanted up and down the river. And so I always like to think about that story because, you know, that opportunistic way of just being there at the right time and then becoming pretty well off because of that.
same with dog bane too, like dog bane, you're rich, just rich, dog bane. You can make some good trades with this, because, like, think of anything you need rope for. Like, tie your horses, tie your lodge, your baskets. I made all these baskets, except this one, my daughter made this one for me, for my birthday this year. You know, this is store-bought yarn, but before it was dog bane coming up, twined around dog bane. And I have a basket I'm working on, I'll show you guys. But yeah, so our wuppus is anything to tie anything down that you could think of, we had to make it. And so to make the tule mats, you know, you make your cordage, you put it on your bone needle and weave it through. So yeah.
And I could go on I could talk for days about just dog bane. I love this plant because when it's growing, you know, ranchers don't like it because it's toxic to cattle. This is it growing green. And it produces a sap that is toxic to livestock, but maybe people that manage livestock know better than I do, but it seems like there would have to be an overgrazed pasture and that's the last thing for them to eat, to actually eat it enough to get sick and die from it. But anyway, when it goes dormant after a frost and the fog, and we gathered in the winter, that chemical, the sap goes down, and then the chemical that's left in the bark is actually a bacteriostatic. It prevents bacteria and mold growth, and it also repels insects and rodents. So storing your roots in a dog bane hemp bag, it's going to last a lot longer than acrylic yarn or anything like that. It's going to keep rodents away. People will even tuck dog bane around the bottom of their lodges to keep mice out from coming in, keeps bugs out. And there was a Chinese medicine doctor that did some study on it and found that just wearing it against your skin helps with dermatitis and psoriasis, helps balance your heart rate. So it's medicine to wear versus what we have now, which is toxic to wear and toxic for the earth. And a lot of land managers today look at it as being toxic because it's potentially harmful to the commodity. And then the things it does for the soil, you know, dog bane hemp grows in kind of gravelly riparian areas, you know, that get decent amount of water some of the year. They grow in a lot of areas, but that seems to be where they like the best. And they are bioaccumulators, so they'll pull toxins out of the soil and the water and transmute them. So all these, and a lot of our native plants do that. And not just the plant, but their fungal partner too. The whatever fungi, mycelium that lives in their root zone can break down a lot of these toxins and contaminants that are in the soil and water that we're dealing with. And I just think that's pretty amazing because, again, covering all of the land and a diversity of native perennials, I feel like is one of the biggest solutions to so many of our problems. And can you imagine, you know, we built all this infrastructure in the floodplain, and that's why We have to keep fighting against the like so much of our energy is tied up fighting against nature to preserve, this built environment. When, if we were to remove things out of the floodplain, start gradually removing ourselves from the floodplain and restoring the floodplain using plants like dogman, hemp, patchouli that will remediate the toxins in the soil and the water and rebuild the soil while giving home to a bunch of wildlife. It's a win-win in my book. And patches of dogman that I've watched too, it's like they like disturbance, like floodplain disturbance. And rivers aren't even allowed to flood anymore, so they're mostly in ditch banks and things like that. But after a flood happens and there's new gravel bars and whatnot, dogman is one of them, along with willows and cottonwoods, that will congregate in that floodplain gravels and sandbars. And so that it'll grow there for a while, and then next thing you know, a bird comes and lands and sits on top, and it shits out an elderberry or a currant or something. The next thing you know, that dogban patch after a few years might turn into a forest of berries. And then the dogban it can grow from its roots, and it also grows from its seeds that are carried by the wind, so it'll drift off to the next little sandbar, and that sandbar will have become a mass of land that, because of that native plants holding it, when the waters come, it collects the sediment, it'll catch logs and rocks that are rolling down and start to form new earth and new soil. All these things that we're trying to figure out how we're going to do with technology. We were already given the technology and the instructions, we just forgot how to follow it. And for Native people, it's no fault of our own. We were forced into a different way of life, and basically, forced against our will, I feel like, from my understanding, to move away from these ways of life. And so getting back to them is a huge part of it, and working with that knowledge, that traditional ecological knowledge, to make decisions moving forward. Because obviously it's not going to look how it did in the past, and it never has. It's always been, how do we adapt to the present circumstances? How do we face the challenges that we're facing and find our strength in it, find our power in it, and apply ourselves. And in some ways that's, I was just listening to a story from a medicine person in South America, talking about how sickness was created so that we could know what it means to heal ourselves, and to heal each other. And maybe that's what we're in, how do we heal from all this? How do we learn to take care of the earth again? As you can tell, any one of these plants has a tremendous amount of teachings to give us about how do we do that. Because every one of these plants is our elder, Every one of these plants has been here a lot longer than you or I, and they've helped us through everything we've ever been through. And this chapter is no different, so.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How long does it take you to make that rope there?
The rope, well, this was my first rope, and so it took me a while because I break down the sticks into fiber like that, and then I brush it out. There's the fibers, there's the sticks, there's the loose fibers, there's the brush fibers that become the. So I never time myself. I know I should probably start timing myself, but many hours.
So we're not gonna walk out with one of those.
Probably not. You might get a bracelet or something, But hopefully someday, there's been a lot of people reach out like, I want to weave a basket, or I want to make a horse rope, so I'm hoping that we can formulate some kind of a dog bane intensive or something.
So that would you use that for a horse rope? Is it strong enough?
I think so, yeah. Well, depending on how.
Yeah.
How
So big your horse is.
Yeah. Maybe not. Might not be able to go catch one off the range.
Dogbane, though, out of all the natural cordage, is the strongest in this area. Yeah, it's the softest and the strongest. So nets were made to catch sturgeon and things like that. Very strong.
And I was told that they, because scientists can study fibers from archaeological sites and determine approximately what location they came from. They found this really old dogbane hemp fishnet in Mexico, and they traced the fibers back to the Snake River.
Wow.
I just thought, that's pretty cool. Our trade networks it's hard for us to think beyond the interstates and the borders and stuff, but geographically, ecologically, you know, these things have been moving. And a few years ago, I could hardly find anyone that knew about dogbane to help me learn how to even make, you know, roll string or anything. And this spring, we actually were fortunate enough to go to the first ever dogbane hemp symposium in Wenatchee. And so it was cool because Wenatchee is pretty central for a lot of us. So there was people from Canada, Idaho, the coast, and all over with all different, whatever little bits of stories and pieces of it that they knew and ways to work with it. And so that was pretty cool to hear some of that, you know, about, you know, even if you had the different levels of value from, if you had a bundle of dogbane sticks, that was of a certain value if you took it over to the coast, you know, if you went past the Cascades with it. And then if you broke it down into fiber, a little bit more valuable. If you brushed the fiber, a little bit more valuable. If you rolled it into a string, anything you want, you know, and they would even take the fiber and mix it with other fibers like stinging nettle or cedar to add strength to it so that they could, you know, 'cause they're catching whales and stuff out there, you know, so they need something strong. And then as cool as this year, we got a grant to go do research at different museums, and we went to this museum in Astoria, and a lot of the stuff was replicated, but the way he replicated a lot of it was a mix of fibers of dogbane, nettle, and even like wool and stuff all mixed together. And I thought, hey, that's pretty cool that he went that route. What's his name? Ed Carrier, that we were over there. But so yeah, love these plants, love working with them, and I'm super grateful that, you know, we're blessed that we can devote our whole lives to this stuff. And humble existence.
Aspen?
What's that?
Can you do anything with aspen?
Aspen? I have not. We've started to replant it here, but I don't know what to do with it besides just sit and listen to those leaves tremble.
Okay, ready?
You guys want to go walk?